Some films were harmed in the making of this podcast. Hello and welcome to another episode of For Your Consideration,
the podcast featuring roundtable discussion re-evaluating the cinematic canon of past masterpieces and modern classics.
I'm Mike Josek.
And I'm Dustin Friesenan. Thanks for joining us.
This week on the show, we decided to celebrate, Kong Month. 84 years ago, RKO Pictures released King Kong to the public. It's gone on to be a pretty legendary film, remade several times. There's a new Kong coming out, I think a week from when we're recording this episode. Kong Skull Island actually looks pretty good, so we thought we would tackle the original Kong and see how it fares, whether we deem it masterpiece or museum piece. And I didn't really leave room for a dummery there, did I?
No, you did not, nor did you look at any of the details or explain any of those.
No, not yet. Although, if you do the dummery now...
There you go. AKA that communist propaganda film which represents clearly the working class's overthrow of a tyrannical despot demanding sacrifices of his people in order to reclaim the means of production.
And for anyone interested, Dustin will explain that summary on a future Facebook post, right, Dustin?
If anyone asks.
Somebody please ask. Alright, so to roll the credits on this episode. So the credits for King Kong are as follows. The film was directed by Merian C. Cooper and Ernest B. Schoedsack. It was produced by Merian C. Cooper and Ernest B. Schoedsack. Screenplay was by James Creelman and Ruth Rose. The story by Edgar Wallace and Merian C. Cooper. It starred Fay Wray, Robert Armstrong, and Bruce Cabot. Music was by Max Steiner. Cinematography was by Eddie Linden, Vernon Walker, and J.O. Taylor. It was edited by Ted Cheeseman. And it was released by RKO Pictures, premiering on March 7th, 1933, and having a wide release on April 7th of that same year. It places 41st in the AFI Top 100 Greatest Films of All Time, and 171st on the Sight and Sound Critics Poll, and 322nd on the Sight and Sound Directors Poll of the greatest films of all time. So, moving on to the film. Dustin, what did you think of King Kong?
This was my first time seeing this one. I've seen Peter Jackson's remake, and most of what I know about that is that this is the movie that inspired him to make films in the first place. So we have these fine people who made this film to thank for such films as Bad Taste, Meet the Feebles, and Forgotten Silver. And I suppose you could say thanks for Lord of the Rings, but I think somebody would eventually have done that movie.
Personally, I'm a Frighteners fan myself. And Heavenly Creatures.
Even though that's a definite departure from his usual splatter comedy films. Anywho, that has nothing to do with what we're talking about today.
Very little.
But I pretty much knew the entire plot going into even that movie. That is how famous this movie is. You know about the island, you know it's Skull Island, you know about the sacrifice, you know about the claim.
Actually, I found it interesting. They didn't once refer to it as Skull Island. It was Skull Mountain.
This is true.
Skull Island, I don't really know a lot of the Kong lore, but Skull Island apparently is something that came in later.
It makes sense if you got a giant island that has a giant skull-shaped mountain on it, though.
I agree. I think it makes more sense to call it Skull Island, but I'm just saying.
Because they weren't looking for the mountain; they were looking for the island. Though they were just said it's an island that has a skull-shaped mountain on it. They specifically said it's Uncharted. Although the director in this film, not the director of the film, the director within the film, making his own Kong movie, sort of eventually. It's convoluted. It's actually really simple. Ignore me. That director is an idiot when it comes to finances. He hears this story from a sole survivor of a Norwegian, I believe it is, Norwegian expedition, who told a skipper of another crew about this island. So he's got this secondhand information about an island that no one else has ever heard of. And he's like, well, time to invest, I don't know how many tens of thousands of dollars just for the possibility of seeing something that might be unique. That is it. That is his plan to become rich and to have a nice, awesome film.
To be fair, and we talked about this a little bit before we sat down to do the recording, I think in 1933, traveling around with a 40-foot ape as your attraction, you probably would be able to make money off of that.
Minus the actual traveling costs and feeding Kong costs and the zookeepers that you'd have to have for it. When your entire Broadway show is just, I'm going to tell a story in front of a 40-foot ape, someone's going to be like, oh, here's the story, I'm going to put it in the paper, you're done now. What are you going to do after 4 months and everyone's seen Kong? No one's going to care. You're not going to go back for a second viewing of, oh, hey, look, it's a giant monkey. You're not going to become a millionaire off of it. But I digress. The movie was actually, as far as like special effects and visuals were concerned, pretty astounding. Like I've seen a lot of older movies, and I've seen newer movies that had way worse special effects than this. There is production quality up the wazoo in this. Where it's lacking is in some of the dialogue, especially on the boat at first, where it's just constantly, yeah, I don't like women. They're bad. I guess they're made bad, and no one. Why would you even have one on a boat?
I agree.
Anywho, I love you, and do you love me?
I agree that for an 84-year-old movie, the production value on this movie is fantastic. The effects really surprisingly hold up, even though as you're watching it, you clearly know all the methods and techniques and whatever they're using. Like there's no.
You can tell, oh, this dinosaur is green screened on there. You can tell exactly where that is. But as they're moving up to the island, I actually didn't know where the cutoff was.
Exactly. And while the production values of this film definitely hold up, their treatment and portrayal of women, unfortunately, not so much. You mentioned the whole I hate women thing in the discussion on the boat. My favorite line that makes me cringe every time I think about it or say it or hear it is, oh, women can't help but be a bother. Yeah.
They're just made that way.
I was like, what?
And the thing is, she agrees with him. She's like, yeah, I guess.
And it's so strange. I mean, I realize, again, 1933, this is a less enlightened time than we're in now.
And I know that sailors back in the day, they thought having women on the ship was bad luck, specifically.
But you have this movie which really portrays the character of Ann Darrow, played by Fay Wray, in such a way as having no agency, no purpose other than being pretty and screaming. I mean, it is...
She literally just screams the whole time, only to have the director say, this is the bravest woman I've ever met.
She's literally window dressing. And yet, this is a movie where the female lead gets top billing. When you look at the credits, when you look at the marquee, when you look on Wikipedia, Fay Wray is the top billed name.
Which is ironic in a meta sense, as you were saying while we were watching, because the director in the film specifically says, as an explanation for bringing her along in the first place, you gotta have a flapper in these films because people want that romance angle.
You could have the most amazing action, the most amazing subject matter, but people want a romance.
So you gotta get a pretty face, and all of a sudden, people are all over it. And it feels like that's exactly the only reason that they have her in it.
And like literally that movie, this is a fun movie. I genuinely like this movie. I have great affection for this movie, not just as a kind of tentpole in the effects field and the action adventure sort of narrative. I do recognize its problems, that being one of the big problems. And it is kind of weird watching it this time. I've seen this movie a few times before, that whole sort of meta-contextual aspect to it, because, yeah, here's probably one of the most exciting movies. This is the movie that essentially brought RKO out of bankruptcy. They were on the brink of going out of business. This movie was a smash hit for them. The romance seems so out of place. Like, Jack just has that moment where he turns to her and he's like, I think I love you.
Do you feel the same? And then they make out. And the only justification for that I could come up with was that, this boat trip probably did take a couple of months. So we don't necessarily see how long they actually spent together. So it's not like Romeo and Juliet type bad, but he was going on about how he doesn't like women. In fact, she says that, I thought you hated women. Well, you're not women. Then no explanation for that. Just straight to the kissing and straight to the we're getting married now. And the thing is, I liked her character while she was on the boat.
I did too.
She's very friendly. She's getting along with people. She's excited at this opportunity. She's actually a fairly compelling character.
She's also one of the better actors in the movie.
Yet, as you said, no agency. The first thing that happens is she's found at a women's shelter because he can't find anyone who will go. So he's like, I'm going to find the most desperate women possible.
What a creepy ass scene.
Oh,
before they get in the cab.
It looks like she's going to steal some fruit. The second she grabs it, she's accused of stealing it, which is, calm down, let her at least pull out a wallet first or look around shiftily, come on. Gets accused of stealing it. Director comes by, tosses the guy $1, tells him to get out of there, sees her face, and immediately just grabs her arm and shouts for a taxi cab.
Well, she goes faint. And as she kind of goes faint in his arms, he's like, well. And then he's like, taxi.
Unconscious pretty woman, taxi. It's insane. And the next scene is her thanking him for coffee.
I did think it was interesting, like, so much of this movie, I haven't seen it since seeing the 2005 Peter Jackson version. And despite that movie being really, really long, like, I think it's an hour longer than this one, Jackson really hit sort of all the points that this movie did. And it was odd because this movie was conjuring up memories of the Jackson movie as I'm watching it, that stealing the apple scene being one of them. And it plays a little bit better with Jack Black's Carl Denham and Naomi Watts's Ann Darrow when they meet, and it's a little less creepy. And I don't know if I was maybe a little more forgiving of the scene because I was thinking of the other movie that had kind of a little more context to that scene, or if I just maybe forgave it because I'm like, 1933. But there were a few moments. There's a few moments in the movie dealing with race and or gender, which are kind of cringeworthy. Charlie the cook.
He's a very bad stereotype. A terrible fake Asian accent. He's just utterly ridiculous. Also, I did love his conversation with Ann Darrow there, where he's peeling potatoes and she's asking him how many he's peeled, and she's just talking about how much she loves being on a boat in the open water, and he's just bitter and cynical as heck. And she's like, well, yeah, I guess. Okay.
And there are moments like that in this movie, which I think is partially the saving grace in my mind, because it's not just all kind of balls to the wall, white man come conquer native, steal giant ape, try and cash in, flaunt very white blonde female as lure to over-sexualized primate.
The thing that I noticed while watching it here is that they interrupt the first sort of sacrifice, and they say, well, the sacrifice is no longer any good, so they kidnap Fay Ray and bring her back to sacrifice that night. I don't think Kong would have come unless they actually hit the bell. Like, why are they bothering summoning Kong? They're all saying that Kong is sort of the god here that everyone's worshipping, revering. I don't feel like there would have been any consequences had they not summoned him to come by. And it's not like there aren't other creatures around, all the dinosaurs and whatnot, but for some reason Kong is singled out.
Well, they have that giant wall.
Yeah, they have the giant wall, but there's also T-Rexes, Stegosauruses, a plesiosaur that took out a bunch of guys, but it's not for any of that. They're not sacrificing anyone to them, only Kong.
It is super vague, and it doesn't.
And even though the sacrifice didn't go through, Kong didn't come by that night like, dude, what the hell? No, he came by the next night or later on.
Yeah, it wasn't like Kong came by and was like, guys, come on.
What the hell?
WTF.
Don't worry, we found a better one. We'll get her to you. She's white, which automatically means people care more.
You kind of expect that, to have things not explained, particularly in an older film. We actually talked about this a little bit with White Zombie, where backstory was not key.
Honestly, though, I thought about it for a few seconds yesterday and sort of realized that's sort of like most traditions. It just became a tradition. You just sacrifice someone on the third moon of every solar whatever. And that's just the way they do it. You need to sacrifice someone, regardless of whether or not anything's going to happen, because they're not willing to test what happens if you don't.
Is your mind going back to Wicker Man too?
Why not? Not the bees. Not the bees.
Not that one. The other one. Anyways, yeah.
The barley rose and all the different barleys. All the barleys.
I did feel that as they so delicately put it, the witch doctor, he's the one who kind of knows the rules and dictates what's what. And if he calls it off, he calls it off. Obviously, one could probably just presume that there is a window that they have to sacrifice, because they obviously did it the very next night. Or no, they didn't.
They kidnapped her that same night, And
just redid the ceremony.
Yeah.
Yeah, so okay.
Probably within
all right.
like 6-7 hours.
All right, so they were still...
If you want to think of it as a window, then
they were slightly behind
solid.
schedule, but otherwise... But yeah, I mean, Kong probably still wouldn't have come unless you hit the bell or the gong.
And we have no idea how long it is between sacrifices, because there was fully grown trees that Kong had to plow through to get to that altar. But I did love and appreciate how they had that language barrier, and there was the skipper, I think it was.
Who could actually talk the language?
Because he was like, this is similar to the other indigenous tribes sort of in this area. And they actually bothered to explain it and have that language barrier. That's great. There's a lot of movies that like to just slough over that, where you're in the middle of Japan, but everyone's speaking English. They might have a few sentences in Japanese, but it's like, no.
That actually touches on something that I was going to bring up a couple minutes ago. During the watching of the movie, you had pointed out that you enjoyed all the preparation scenes. You liked seeing them grabbing the guns and getting in the boats. And then you were talking about Anne and Jack's budding romance. And you said, to be fair, they've probably been on the boat for like 3 months. For somebody who was so kind of interested and invested in the preparation, I found it interesting that you were so forgiving of kind of the relationship just sort of happening.
That was the only excuse that I could give it. Really, it is a terrible sort of, it's just sort of shoehorned right in there. But yes, I love when a movie shows me these are the things that somebody has, so that when they use it, it makes perfect sense. There's no Deus Ex Machina happening here. These are the supplies they have, and it's the supplies they use.
I think if Bruce Cabot as Jack Driscoll was not as stiff of an actor, if they would have had, love eyes in a couple of the scenes previous, or if he would have had any kind of intimation, I think I would have bought it more. But I mean, he's such a wooden actor. He's
the director does mention it. He's like, "Oh, I see you guys making them eyes. Don't be doing that." And of course, maybe back in the day, all you had to do is tell a woman that you hate women, and she fell for you. Maybe that's how it worked. I'm not a pickup artist. Maybe this is why I'm single.
Okay, let's move on from the things that irked us and talk about some of the things this movie does right, which in some respects happens pretty much from when Kong takes Anne and goes off into the jungle, because that's kind of where like the real adventure stuff begins, and some of the really like fabulous technical achievements of this movie.
I honestly was expecting it to be far worse as far as the special effects and the interaction, especially between everything. There were a lot of moments where they had the people switch between stop motion and live action, and most of the time you could tell the difference, but sometimes the guys were just really small, and I honestly wasn't too sure. Is the stop motion just really good right now because it's not super choppy, and other times the regular actors were a little bit choppy or didn't fit quite right, so it actually blurred it a little bit.
I was really paying attention, and there were so many moments where you'd get just like a little flash, because they wanted to include the character to show scale and to show sort of interactivity between the effects and the real actors. And an actor would go behind a rock, and then there'd be like a stop motion figure that would just sort of pop out and wave or something, just for like a split second, just to create that tangible sort of sense of reality.
They had little things like tail movements of the dinosaurs during the fights, waving, and all the body movements. You never saw like an arm jerk off at some random angle. Everything looked very natural. Even like when Kong won any fight, usually he'd test to make sure that the animal is alive, open the mouth and jaw and whatnot. I've seen other videos of live gorillas. They obviously have too, because they did it super, super well.
And when Kong is wrestling, when he's fighting with that T-Rex, he does a couple of rolls and a couple of they look like wrestling moves. And they're so fluid, like
super fluid.
It was like really, really nicely done. I mean,
and the T-Rex trying to bite him sort of sideways, trying to get his head in there. Like I play fight with a lot of cats and dogs, and that's exactly what they do. Like the fighting felt very natural between two completely fake beings.
And they went for a lot of detail. They went for a lot of little sort of minute things that they could have passed over just for a sense of, just to conserve on time or cost. But I guess they wanted to just really sell like the reality of it. And even though Kong and the other dinosaurs look fake, and you know that they're models with armatures and they're being moved around and whatever. When those things are happening, you buy into it, and your suspension of disbelief is just like, it's turned to 11.
Even with stop motion, which is the creepiest and most obvious of special effects sort of movements, it looked a lot better than when they had the real big Kong face.
Yes, with the big dumb smile.
Big dumb smile. Oh, it was pretty bad. But any time where you had a big hand up there that was grabbing Anne, or when he goes stomping through the native village and starts stepping on a few people after chewing them up a little bit, like, that was really good.
Or they would combine the stop motion Kong, and you'd get him in side profile, and then they would have like a real Kong arm with Fay Ray in the hand. It was just so beautifully blended. Like, they did their work. This was, I mean, there's a reason this movie has withstood the test of time and why it was such a huge hit when it came out. And
as far as I'm concerned, for stop motion like this, it lives up to today.
I will say, and
it's not Kubo and the Two Strings kind of smoothness, but it's still really good.
I realize I said we were going to move forward onto the things that we liked and that were good, but since we're talking about Kong and we're talking about the whole like adventure, the big second act, were you as bothered by Kong tearing off parts of her dress and tickling her and smelling his fingers?
That's very monkey-like behavior as far as from the videos I've seen on the internet.
I don't want to know why you're watching primate videos on the internet.
I watch everything, man.
All right.
I watch everything. And stuff becomes memes.
But that was apparently that scene, as well as some of the more violent scenes. There's a lot of crew deaths.
There's a lot of violence. People are torn to pieces, they're crushed, and they're just chewed up and thrown everywhere and dropped to their death.
When the plesiosaur is eating that dude on the tree, that was apparently an edit that was taken out kind of in years after. Kong stepping on the villagers, that was taken out. Which
is a shame. I thought that was actually superb. Well done.
The de-dressing and the tickling and whatnot was deemed kind of too inappropriate, and that was also taken out. Which
it's also really odd. It's like he's playing doll.
It is super odd. Oh, and the scene at the end when he picks up a woman thinking it's Anne and it's not Anne.
So he just tosses her, and I knew that was going to happen. I called it.
That's an amazing scene, but I mean, I can see why people would want to cut that out for like television presentations or whatever. But
this was before the Hays Code and before a lot of different censorship things.
You can really understand why this movie struck such a chord. I mean, it's really thrilling if you don't think about it too much. Like, it really is quite a roller coaster ride. And once the action starts, like, it really doesn't stop.
They're fighting non-stop, just dinosaur after dinosaur. And Kong is too. Like, is this his everyday, you were saying?
Yeah, I was like, is this what Kong does every day? Like, he gets up, he goes to the bathroom, and says, fight a giant snake. Or is this just, like, on this day because he's got a new toy or whatever, and everyone's coming out and...
But yeah, in 5 minutes, it's T-Rex, giant snake, pterodactyl.
Stegosaurus.
The Stegosaurus was fought by the crew only.
Okay, you're just talking
Kong
about
wasn't involved
just what Kong fights, yeah.
Yeah, because otherwise you've also got the Stegosaurus and the Plesiosaur. That's quite the ecosystem you've got going on here.
And there's
that are just dying all over.
When he's trying to grab Jack on the cliff, and that little lizard thing comes up.
That little lizard thing, it was a nice addition, but I don't quite remember exactly what it did. I don't think it fought anyone. It was just sort of knocked off quickly, wasn't it?
You know, I was hoping you'd remember.
What I do remember is Jack stabbing at Kong's hand,
and
Kong being like, son of a...
Yeah.
And I adored that. That was great.
Another really great example of how they blended the effects and the real work on set.
And it made perfect sense in the scheme of everything. And I could see Kong just getting bored of getting his hand poked and being like, whatever, I don't even care no more.
Now, you mentioned this film has a score by Max Steiner. Another couple films that we've talked about that Steiner's done the music for, Gone with the Wind and Casablanca. Me personally, not a fan of the Gone with the Wind score. Big fan of the Casablanca score. I didn't really connect to the King Kong score.
Some of it was really good, but then they'd have music that didn't quite fit.
They kind of Mickey Moused it, where the music would go with the movements of characters and stuff.
Oh, yeah, when they were walking
and
they'd
very
stop.
Descriptive.
Yeah, that stood out to me big time. Did not play nicely.
I guess this movie or this score kind of stands out because it wasn't that long before King Kong that original music scores were being done for films. And apparently Merian C. Cooper was told to just use some existing songs, and they were only given something like 11 hours or something to record the score. They hired a 45-piece symphony or orchestra, and he told Max Steiner, don't worry about it, just do what you got to do.
That's insane.
and he paid for it out of his own pocket, and I guess he paid something like $50,000 to get that score. And people have said that score was integral to the success of the movie. So I guess just kind of like an interesting historical fact that this was one of the early films with an original musical score. And actually the music does carry through a lot of the movie.
Absolutely. It's definitely, it's always there. Whether or not it's always there in the right mood, that's up for debate.
So I'm thumbs down on this score just from a personal perspective. Did you enjoy it, or was it kind of a mixed bag for you?
It's definitely a mixed bag. It's not something... There's some parts that were good, some parts that were bad. As I've said before in other shows, like if I don't notice the score, usually that's a good sign. Here I noticed it being good, and I noticed it being bad, so it just sort of evens out. Thumbs sideways, I guess. And twiddling, I give it 2 thumbs twiddling.
I guess when I say thumbs down too, I mean, it wasn't a terrible score. I just didn't connect with it. I mean, same with Gone with the Wind. There's nothing really inherently bad about the Gone with the Wind score. It's not something that I derive any joy from or want to revisit.
And this is a man who has movie scores all over his music collection. I know because I have his music collection, and I can tell you neither of these movies are in there.
So we've covered the acting, we've covered the writing, the misogyny, the effects.
The very poor business plan of a Mr. Dunham.
Is there anything else we should cover before we move on to our judgment phase?
You gotta feel sorry for Kong for sure, especially at the end. He was innocently going about his day when he's kidnapped, chained up, and then he tries to escape, which is entirely logical, and they just gun him down. And then they go back to that ancient Arabic proverb they had at the beginning about how beauty kills the beast, and that's the last line in the movie.
Also going back to that ancient tradition of blaming the woman.
It certainly had nothing to do with the guns. It was beauty that killed the beast. So who's the real 50-foot terrible monster? Women.
There's just nowhere to go from there.
There is nowhere to go. Hooray for sexism in movies. I guess it might be getting less bad or worse. That's an entirely other debate.
So we'll jump into the judgment phase now. As I said before, I really personally, I find this movie entertaining despite its faults. I enjoy it. I like the adventurous aspect of it. It kind of harkens back to sort of that classic monster movie aesthetic. Obviously, it's a seminal film. It's inspired so many films that have come after it. I'm personally excited to go see Kong Skull Island, like I said earlier in the show.
Any preview I've seen of it, like I don't normally like John C. Reilly, but his lines in the previews are just superb.
Hopefully those aren't his only scenes in the movie.
And hopefully those aren't the only good lines.
But despite all of that, despite me enjoying the movie and liking the movie, I am going to not vote this as a masterpiece. Definitely a museum piece. I think just because of its position in sort of film history and special effects history, it is a museum piece. This is a classic film, but I think the quality of the acting, some of the writing, there was just too many negatives for me to go masterpiece on this one. So that's me. How about you?
Well, I agree definitely that it's a museum piece because, well, as you said, so many things that they do right in terms of firsts and what it's certainly done to cinema later on with monster movies and special effects. But for once, I think I'm going to have to go the opposite of you on masterpiece part because I'm comparing this to other action-adventure movies. I'm not going to compare it to a movie with real depth where you're going to be thinking and change your opinion on anything. Just as a pure action film, an action-adventure, I think it still stands up. It does what an action-adventure film is supposed to do 84 years later. Yes, there are some problems, but it is a movie that I would actually bother revisiting, and I could see why people would be doing remakes of this movie. So I think it actually holds up and will continue to hold up. And yes, there are flaws. But, as most people would say, that is one of the issues of the time in which it was made. Especially since, just like White Zombie, this was on the cusp of a silent film era. So acting was a very different beast at the time.
1927 was The Jazz Singer, first sound film.
1932 is White Zombie, so if we're going to use that for that,
oh, I know.
1933 is this.
I know. I was just, for anybody who doesn't actually know when the first sound film, I was kind of just giving a benchmark.
I didn't know, so. But I would put it as a masterpiece. I will actually go that route this time.
I was kind of hoping you would. I was kind of hoping we'd disagree on this one. We were going to do this right after we watched the film, but I was so wasted, tired, and I'm actually glad that we waited to do it the next day because I had some time to really kind of sit and think about it. And I honestly don't know what I would have said or where I would have landed had we sat down and just kind of did it. I'm kind of curious, actually, just mentioning it now, where I would have landed, but I'm comfortable with my decision. So that is a 1 yay and 1 nay for King Kong, the 1933 original.
So let us know what you think. If it is a classic, a masterpiece, a museum piece. If the dummery is a whole Lord of Horsepucky that needs explanation.
And you can find us on Facebook and on Twitter. Our handle there is at FYC Show. We're on Instagram. We are on Stitcher and iHeartRadio. If you know anybody who gets their podcasts from there and aren't currently listening to us and you think they'd like us, let them know. If you get the show off of iTunes, as many of you do, while you're there, it only takes a minute. Please rate and review the show. Let us know what you think there. Give us a 5-star rating if you feel it's warranted. It really helps us in the podcast standings. But we do want you to be honest, so don't just do it because we're telling you to. That's coercion.
We have your children hostage. Especially those of you who don't have children. Have you ever seen them? No, we've got them.
And with that, we'll wrap up another fantabulous, fun episode of For Your Consideration.
Until next time, I'm Dustin Friesenan.
And I'm Mike Schoedsack.
Take care.
Ta-ta.
Screw having to write stuff on Facebook, because I never write anything on Facebook. Dummery explanation. If you're going to be overanalyzing it like some sort of art film student, you look at the fact that he's a king, he's King Kong, and what you've got is him with a tyrannical dictatorship over these serfs, that he's demanding their sacrifices, they're all basing their life around him, when all of a sudden you got these working class men coming in on a boat, and they all take him down, they overthrow his regime, and you've got the director saying, we're going to make millions, I'm sharing it with you all. Total communist propaganda. All of a sudden they're bringing him back and they're having the king work for them. Maybe the king escaping and them having to kill him doesn't quite fit in with the stupid metaphor, but I'm going to go with it anyway because I had to come up with something for the dummery. So there.
And that is our end of episode tag. Thank you, Dustin.
That's what I'm here for.